Hello, everyone. We're back with you again. It's myself, Sinead Willihan, and Barbara Lamb, who you are all here to listen and learn from. She's going to be talking today on episode 13 about early life experiences of ET encounters. Really, really fascinating topic. And a lot of people apparently think that we only have contact experiences when we're older, even if they start when we're very, very young. But Barbara's going to talk about how young that can begin and what those experiences are like, as opposed to perhaps adult experiences, the way that we process them when we're older. So, Barbara, this is going to be a really, really great talk. I've been looking forward to this a lot. I'm very interested in children, as you know, and so is the audience. There's been so much discussion about this new generation of youth coming into the world and how some of them appear to be some, I'm going to say special, but that's not the right word, have abilities and to be here for a reason and for a purpose, which I'm wondering, if that connects to what you're going to be talking about today. So please feel free to dive in. It's great to be back with you.
Okay, well, thank you, Sinead, and wonderful to be with you and everyone else too who's listening to this. In this work that I've been doing of regressions with people who've had extraterrestrial encounters, so often it comes up that they either consciously remember having had experiences with the other beings very, very early in life. And then in the regressions, many times the adult person whom I'm regressing goes back sort of automatically in the regression to an experience that they happened amazingly early in life sometimes. So it is a thing that sometimes the regressions take us directly to one of those very, very early life experiences. And sometimes, as I just mentioned, the regressions will remind somebody in the middle of a regression, they'll remember a much, much earlier in life experience than they had consciously been remembering. So, anyway, a lot of material has been coming out into my awareness from people who come to me about these very early life experiences. The very earliest life experience that I know about from my work came from a man whom I was doing regressions with in the 1990s. Anyway, he at that time was in his early 50s when he started coming to me for regressions. And he knew that he must have had experiences of that type, although in the 1990s, hardly anybody was aware of it or hardly anybody was talking about it. But he knew he had something to do with space and spaceships. And he just somehow knew that he had come to know the occupants, but it wasn't very clear in his conscious awareness. So, in that first regression, we decided to go back to the earliest experience with extraterrestrials, if he had had one. At that point, I didn't even know for sure that he had. But what happened in that regression was absolutely amazing to me because he found himself a fetus in his mother's womb. That was his first extraterrestrial encounter. So here he was. We had no idea that that's where he would go back to in the regression. Just go back to the first one. So then he started saying, "Oh, it's all warm and cozy and moist, and I'm hearing this thump, 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 and hearing felt like kind of liquid sort of gurgling around me." And we realized that he was in his mother's womb. And while he was in his mother's womb, at about age 7 or 8, I think probably 8 months in development in his mother's womb, on this one occasion that came up in the regression, he said, "Oh, now I feel extra warmth coming to me from the front side. Oh, that feels really nice. And then he heard in his little fetus mind, he heard a male voice talking to him and saying, "Don't worry, this is just fine. I am here to help you. You have a hole in your heart. And if you are born this way, you will not be able to live very long because the heart will be bleeding and your life will have to end. And I want your life to continue, for you to have your full life. So this being said, I am putting an invisible electromagnetic strip over the hole in your heart. And this will help you to be able to live once you are born." So time went on and the man was born, and he did not die. He had this invisible electromagnetic strip over the hole in his heart, which nobody knew about, of course, even the obstetricians. And he grew up, and then about a year later, he was taken again. This came out in subsequent regressions, taken again by the same being. And he was able by that time to describe the being. And he even gave a name to the being. The being gave a name for himself, which was Mazu. And Mazu said to this 1-year-old baby, "I am refurbishing the invisible electromagnetic strip over the hole in your heart." And then that kept happening about every year or so. This man, as a child, was taken for another encounter with the same being, Mazu. And my client kept describing this being. He was kind of a gray look skin, and he had eyes that had different facets in them. He called, my client called this being the man with the beveled eyes. And so they were sort of shiny, like a diamond or a bob from certain kinds of lamps that have different angles to them, beveled. And that's what this man, this ET man, had. So anyway, probably it happened every year or so that Mazu would take my client again for another repair of, or replacement of, or refurbishment of the invisible electromagnetic strip over the hole in my client's heart. And this boy grew up to be a 6-foot tall, husky, broad-shouldered man who did physical activity, not only in his life, but in his work. He did a physical job, and he stayed healthy and strong and was able to do all of this work, went right on with his life until his very late 40s. I think he was 48, when it was detected by Earth doctors that he did have some difficulty going on with his heart. And so he went in for heart surgery. And fortunately, his wife was a surgical nurse and got special permission to be in the operating room while this major heart surgery was going on for her husband. So she was right there to witness that the surgeon, when opening up the man and looking at his heart, said, "Oh, this man has a hole in his heart the size of a silver dollar, and yet very little blood leaking from it. I don't understand this."
Wow.
So, in other words, he probably encountered that invisible electromagnetic strip over the hole in the man's heart. Anyway, the heart surgery was done, and he was able to continue his life for a number of years after that. So that was the youngest encounter with an extraterrestrial that I personally am aware of from my work.
And Barbara, can I ask you a quick question? The beveled eyes, have you ever heard of it being like that before from any of your other clients?
I've never heard that description, so it really stands out to me. And
Yes.
there may be other beings who have beveled eyes, but I just have never heard that reported by anybody. I've heard some people report sparkly
Mhm,
eyes or
mhm.
shining eyes or very bright eyes, but I have not heard that description of the beveled eyes.
Interesting. That's definitely very unique. I've never heard that before either. But also, what a stroke of luck to have his wife as someone who was qualified enough to know what was going on in the surgery and to recognize the significance of what the surgeon said once he saw that.
Nation that this man really did have a hole in his heart.
Hmm.
You
Wow.
know, he was able to live with it.
Mhm.
And it was a big hole, too, according to the surgeon.
Yes,
So
and
it's
to have made it that
bigger
life. Yeah, yeah, incredible.
up. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Pretty amazing things happen in hospitals, as we know from all the many near-death experiences that happen that doctors and nurses are a witness to. Okay, I'd like to talk more about the hospital situation. Um, it has been known, it's been reported, and with some of my clients as well, that a newborn baby is placed in an incubator, as we know, many of them are, and encounters, removals of that newborn baby can happen right there in that nursery situation. So there's always some personnel, of course, in the room with the incubators, keeping a lookout on everything. But you see, the beings come and they switch off any personnel who might be in that room. In other words, they make them just not harmed in any way, but just totally out of consciousness. That whatever they were doing when the beings came, they were just sort of stopped, shall we say, frozen in whatever their activity was. And then the encounter comes and the removal of the newborn baby. And then it's been found through some of my work that um, they take those babies sometimes just to check up on them, like we would do, and make sure that everything is going well with that newborn baby. In other words, that baby is of importance to them, and they will most likely continue to be visiting with and removing for a while those babies as they continue on through life and even through their adult life. And sometimes it's known that they will take a baby from the incubator in the hospital and they will inject some of their extraterrestrial DNA into that little infant. So I've been thinking lately that, there are so many inoculations, so many shots required now um, of our newborn infants. And I mean, what an amazing thing to think of that alone. And then to think that the extraterrestrials may also be injecting some of their DNA in the baby when they want to create a hybrid baby. That's just one of the many ways in which the extraterrestrials create hybrids. So anyway, sometimes they take the newborn baby and just simply check up and make sure everything's okay. And they'll even sometimes say things like, "Oh, we're just helping you to get used to us right from the beginning of your life because you will be with us lifelong. We will be definitely working together." So that's an interesting thing. I also had one client who gave birth to a baby, and she was in her hospital bed for a day or so, and the nurses would bring in her newborn baby, and she would hold the baby, and she would nurse the baby. So on one occasion, she was sort of semi-propped up in her hospital bed, and with the baby right there, holding the baby and nursing the baby. And it was so peaceful and so wonderful and soothing for the baby and for her too, the mother. And so she sort of dozed off to sleep. And then during that time, or it could be that she was made to go to sleep, made to be out of consciousness. In any event, a being came, a female being came, sort of a tall one, and came, one of the female ETs who looked more like a human. Some of them looked very, very human. This was one of those who looked quite human, and just took that baby away for an hour or so. And when the mother woke up again and the baby wasn't there, she thought, oh, one of the nurses must have come and taken the baby back to the nursery. So she didn't think very much of it. She recognized that she had been what she thought was asleep. So those kinds of experiences can happen. And that's, of course, within the very first few days of life. And then many, many kids, when they're extremely little, are taken 1 year, 2 years, 3 years old. And I've heard a number of people describing in their regressions being in their crib. So they might be 1 year old or 2 years old, 2.5, maybe even 3. And so many clients have reported incidents that have happened where they've been asleep in the crib, and suddenly there may be light in the room if it's night, or in the daytime. They just notice that a being is there. If the being is short, it might be looking right through the bars of the crib at them at eye level. And if the being is taller, it might be actually next to the crib and looking down into the crib at the baby. And in these regressions, even though they're just babies, they recall, the subconscious part of their mind has recorded it all, so they can recall the details of being lifted up. And very often, but not always, that is a female being, and usually one that seems very kindly and very safe, even if looking very different than we look. And so the baby usually just gets lifted up, taken out of the crib and out through the wall and into a craft, and various things occur. Mostly, from what I know so far, those visits are kind of for physical checkups, making sure that this baby is doing well. And if there's anything not doing well in the baby physically, the beings will usually just go right ahead and heal that before they return the baby to the crib. So then there are children, many of them who have experiences at age 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. In fact, I think that it's extremely likely that anybody who, as an adult, is realizing that they are having occasional experiences with these other beings, that they most likely have had experiences since early childhood. So the child will report different things. Even consciously, they'll report certain things to their parents. And the parents might take them seriously if they have been having experiences too, which is often the case. But in many cases, the parents are not aware of this sort of thing. And so they say, oh, it's just your imagination. Don't worry about it. Or that must be your imaginary friend. Or, well, it was probably just a dream. that somebody was coming into your room at night. And the children usually have a sense that, no, this was real. This really happened. But it sometimes is very hard to convince other people about that, even their own parents. So they'll very often talk about somebody coming out of the closet in their bedroom and coming over to the crib. I mean, I've heard that quite a number of times from people. And it makes me wonder if maybe the closet might be some sort of portal that these beings can come through. That's just a question I have. I don't know that that is so, but they report coming out of a closet.
That's something I wanted to ask you about, actually, Barbara, because of course I don't know nearly as much about childhood experiences as you do, but that is one of the things I've heard repeatedly through just various people in the community, whether they're known or not.
Right.
Just experiencers who say that these beings come out of doorways or come through doorways or come out of closets or come out of cupboards. So it seems like it's not always even a space that has a door. It can be a doorway that they'll come through. And that's really interesting to me because, we're learning more and more about quantum physics and how real, meaning how real world, how immediate in our experience, the reality of quantum physics is, such as, the physicality around us being an illusion, right? That this table that is in front of me right now is not really solid. So then why would doorways and doors and closets even matter if materialism doesn't matter beyond this dimension? I have so many questions about that. But
Yeah,
it's interesting to hear that you don't know the reason either. I thought you might know. And I mean, the only logical thing to jump to would be that there is some sort of energy that is condensed in these spaces of doorways or closets that can have a portal effect. Yeah.
that's a very good thought that you have. And there is kind of a condensation in a closet or a cupboard and the door. Yes, I've heard a number of people describe that they'll wake up at night or they'll get up at night to go to the bathroom and they're aware that just behind the door going to the bathroom or to the hallway, that there is a little being, and the little being will sometimes just pop in to take a look quickly and then pop out again. Yeah. And so it's confusing for the person. Did I really see something? No, I don't see it. But if I do, but I've had a couple of clients who experienced that. And then when they went through the door, they actually looked on the other side of the door. And yes, indeed, there was a being right there. It might be a short one or medium size or a tall one, right there, that what they thought they saw, they really had seen. And then, of course, at that point, they are usually rendered out of consciousness, and so that the encounter can happen. Or once in a while, I've had a client report that when they've gone past the door, they've looked, and there is a being right there in their hallway or their bathroom or wherever, and that the being has just suddenly disappeared. Once being seen, the being will just poof, seem to pop out of our reality. So this certainly stimulates the question about whether or not these beings, or at least some of them, come from another dimension of reality, or if they all maybe have the ability to go into another dimension of reality immediately if they feel the need to do that. So I think that there are many questions of this type that are not quite answered, or at least I don't know the answer to. I just know that people do experience them and seem to benefit by explaining or describing the experience as they had had it, even without knowing how could this possibly be, you know. And by the way, it really does help people to talk about these experiences, even if what they were aware of was just a quick moment or two. I can't tell you how many people who have come to me, and it's been a few thousand people who have done regressions with me, and even more regressions, because some people come back for a whole series of regressions to extraterrestrial experiences. But
Yeah, and
so
because you're a rock star and you keep doing regressions, you're doing several regressions a week still, which is just amazing.
every
Yeah.
day, right? Yeah, yeah. So, and it's such a privilege. Everyone is unique. Every person who has regressions with me is so precious, and they have all gone through amazing things. Most of them nowadays are fully adult people of all ages. And for decades, they have probably been thinking about certain unusual things that have happened and that they never understood at the time. But then when they look back from age, say, 50 or 60 or 70 or 80, I've had 80-year-olds coming, one's scheduled to come next weekend. And, you know, they've wondered for all these years. And sometimes, most of us can remember something about our childhoods. And some of us can remember back to age 3. I've met other people who can consciously remember a bit earlier than age 3. But still, most of the material that we get about these really early life experiences, they tend to come from the regression work that the people do with me. So I'd like to talk about how some children describe these visitors in their room. Some of them call them like little stars, sort of flying around the room, or sparkles of light. If they were a little bit older, looking back on an experience in childhood, they might call them orbs. But anyway, the little children usually call them things like sparkles and dots of light, or little colors will be sort of moving around in the room, or some of them will describe them as these little dots or specks or lights or colors will be dancing, swirling around in the room. And from a young child's point of view, that's not necessarily scary. It's just like, oh, how fascinating. Almost like watching fireworks. But it's a special show right there for them in their own room, which makes it sort of fun. And some of them have described little flies, sometimes little flies up by the ceiling, or flies making a circle around. And they know they're not really flies, but they don't know what else to call them because it's something that's not been there before, and it's moving around. And they have a feeling with these lights and orbs and flies and so forth, somehow, that they're being watched. So it's not like they see a person or a being watching them, but they still have that feeling that not only are they watching them, but they are being watched themselves somehow. And somehow that's okay enough. It's not really scary. It's sort of mystifying, but very often they're just curious about that. Some people I know who, when they were children, assume that these little lights flying around in the room are fairies. And in one situation, the little girl said to her mother, Oh, I get visited by these fairies sometimes at night. I miss it on the nights when it doesn't happen, but they come quite a lot. And I want you to come in and see them. They're really sweet. And the mother said, well, no, I won't come in because it's only children who see the fairies. So probably if I came into your room and they were flying around, I probably wouldn't even see them. So anyway, the child had to accept that as the reason why the mother wouldn't come in. And some children have described a being who comes in as a little man. Others have said a funny little man. Others have said a strange little man. Or others have said, well, this weird little guy, because they look different than we do. But this weird little guy keeps coming into my room at night. And they don't remember much after that. They don't remember necessarily being removed by the little being. And sometimes they consider this little visitor my friend. Oh, my little friend came again last night. And when they tell that to parents, parents will usually think, oh, that's nice. They have an imaginary friend. Lots of children have that. But these are really not imaginary. They really are visiting beings.
So
Uh,
if they're calling them little men, Barbara, does that mean that the beings are appearing humanoid? Are they appearing to be human, but just smaller? Okay.
not necessarily appearing humanoid. They may be look incredibly different, in fact, but the kids just don't know what else to call them.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Not that it really looks like their dad or anybody else human, but
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know what else to say. And one woman uh, used to wake up from her crib, and then later on, when she was a bit older, in a bed, a youth bed, she would look up and see these little things all around the top of the wall, all around the room, right by the ceiling. And she called them um, little widgies. She just made up that name because nobody else seemed to be seeing these little widgies. Her parents didn't seem to be seeing the little widgies, but it turned out that whenever those little widgies would come and be up on the high ceiling, up by the high wall, up by the ceiling, uh, that was when she would have a real encounter with the beings. So it seems that all of these little things, whether they're looking like flies or lights or orbs or fairies or widgies or whatever, um, they not only come and usually swirl around, sort of filling up the room, like checking out the whole room, going around and sometimes making somersaults and pretty patterns in the air. And then they seem to materialize, coalesce into a being or two or three beings from somewhere else. And then the encounter starts and the removal of the person who has been seeing that. And there are stories of orbs that have come into the room and then have gathered together after swirling around. So it's one big orb, and that gets bigger and bigger. And out of that orb steps one or two or three extraterrestrial beings who will have that encounter. Now, how that gets achieved, I have no idea, but it is experienced and it is reported by a number of people, probably a lot of people. So I think it's just really interesting. Now, some of these experiences happen for little children. I've done several of these regressions in the last few months where the child is outside playing during the daytime. One of them that happened just a couple of weeks ago in the regression, that is, was the woman went back to her childhood, and with her friend who lived down the street, they were outside daytime playing on the sidewalk, and they had colored chalks, and they were drawing pictures on the sidewalk. So they were all bent over, drawing pictures on the sidewalks. And then one of them was turned off, switched off, just made to be there, unaware of anything and not moving. And then my client was removed for an experience on the spaceship with a being who came there. And another lady whom I regressed quite a number of times, she described two experiences from her childhood when she was outside playing on her front lawn. And it happened that across the street from her home was an open field. And so she was playing with her favorite doll, sitting in the low grass on her lawn. And suddenly she had the feeling that everything had stopped. There was no sound. There had been little flies and the rustling of trees, leaves in the trees, but suddenly there wasn't any sound. There were no cars driving along the road, no distant traffic, no sound of music that her mother was playing in the house. It just silent. And it kind of felt, she said, like everything stood still. And then she noticed that across the street, there was a silvery looking craft of some sort that had landed in the field, and three little beings came across the street to her and took her away for an experience. And she grabbed her doll as she saw them coming, and they took her with her doll in her hand onto the spaceship. And she was returned after a while back into the grass, slightly different place in the lawn, but still there at home in the front lawn. But her doll wasn't with her. And so she wasn't upset by any of those other aspects of the experience, but she was very upset that her doll wasn't there anymore. And she began to realize that she had been taken away, and maybe the doll was wherever she had been taken away to. She didn't have the concept of a spaceship or extraterrestrials or anything at that young age. But anyway, she forever after that, even as an adult, being regressed back to that experience as a child, she was still angry that that doll had not been returned.
Oh, that's very funny. That kind of reminds me a bit of the John Mack research into the school in, oh my God, I want to say it was called Rhodesia. Pardon me.
Ariel School in
Yes,
Zimbabwe.
the Ariel School. Thank you. In Zimbabwe. That's it. And all those children, how they were not scared. They were mystified or puzzled, but not scared. And they felt like it had not been a frightening or aggressive or scary experience. It was just something that was incredibly unfamiliar to them, and they didn't really know how to process it. So
it's like whole different had never known about. And then also, you see, the beings were about the same height as the children. So in other words, the little child would stand there and eye to eye,
right,
same level eye contact with the beings, which was very powerful as well.
mm-hmm.
And the beings communicated to them telepathically, which extraterrestrials usually do. And so the children were hearing this in their minds, which was a whole new experience they had never had with anybody else. And so the whole thing was, whoa, very, very powerful and mystifying and real, very impactful. each one of those children, especially the ones who had the direct eye-to-eye contact with the beings, were just profoundly affected, and not in a bad way, but like completely blown open, like, wow, there is this in existence. And this one really spoke deeply to me. And in most of those conversations between the one of the little beings and the children, that they were urged to be sure to take good care of the earth, that these beings were aware of what the adults, humans, were doing to ruin the earth, really hamper it and destroy it in some ways, and destroy life on earth by their practices. So they were making a very powerful impression on these children,
Mhm.
that when they grow up, be sure to really treat the earth better, take care of the earth. You have a very, very precious planet. You
Mhm.
need the earth to be all right.
So is this a pattern that you've seen in your regression sessions as well? Because that, what I'm wondering about is you're talking on patterns of experience that children have had. And one of the patterns that we've seen in ET research, maybe particularly with children, I don't know, you can speak to this, is this concern for the earth and the concern for the planet and the concern for humans surviving and what we're doing to nature and animals. And of course that appeals to children who have very big caring hearts, are as yet unfettered by the heavy weight of the world, so to speak.
Right.
So have you found that the patterns of what you're talking about now have continued across the decades, or have the patterns changed across the decades?
Well, there is still that pattern, and there are additional patterns too, with people who have these experiences with the other beings. Um, yes, some people still in their adult life, in their visits, are implored to take care of the earth and change our technology so that we have more clean technology which will not be ruining the earth, and many other sometimes specific suggestions for caring for the earth. And then many adults nowadays are reminded of or even given different missions that they have, missions stimulated by the extraterrestrial beings. And so it might be to help people with their health, or help people with healing, or with psychic readings, or using their intuition, or saving a certain group of people who are being very badly mistreated, or whatever. I mean, there are many, many missions that are helpful, really good, important missions that people are doing, that when they really look into it, they realize that it's being not only supported by, but urged by extraterrestrial beings with whom they have occasional ongoing contact. So I would like to mention that there is a children's book, which an illustrator, Mary Edwards, and I have written, and it's in its second publishing right now. So it's very much in my mind. And this book is for children and their parents. It's called Kids Adventures with ET Friends in Space. And there are 18 different scenarios pictured here
Oh,
in
wonderful.
of, of children's experiences, real life experiences that they really had, that come out of my work, regression work and conversation with children. And so it gives 18 different depictions of different kinds of things that children have experienced on the spacecraft. and being visited by beings in the room. And these are all positive experiences that children have had, because there are many, many positive things. Sometimes a child is just taken, this has come up 2 or 3 different times, different people. They're just taken to be able to get familiar with the spacecraft. They're allowed to walk around in the hallways and look into different rooms and see what's going on. I remember one client who really loved to do that, and she was allowed to do that. And she kind of felt like, oh, this is a special privilege that I'm being given. And I'm also cautioned, she said, never to touch the walls. The walls in the spaceship that she kept getting taken to were kind of a greeny, bluish, kind of a turquoise color. And the walls seemed to be kind of like with light shining out evenly throughout the whole wall. And she kind of felt like the walls were somehow living. She never found out for sure whether or not that was true, but that was her sense. These sort of living, almost breathing, glowing, beautiful walls that would be in the hallway, and she would go around and look into different rooms and see what was going on. Sometimes there were other people in there, and of course there were other beings of various types. And that was always part of the adventure that she would have when she was taken on the spaceship. She was also examined, checked over to make sure that she was all right. And if there was anything amiss, any sickness or injury or anything going on in her little body, the beings would usually just right then and there use lots of light on that problem and heal it right then and there. Or they would tell her, oh, you really ought to have your appendix checked. It looks like there might be a bit of a problem brewing there in your appendix. So when your mom takes you to a doctor the next time, mention the appendix, that you think that ought to be checked. And sometimes the children will remember to do that and will ask the doctor. Sometimes maybe they don't remember. How do we know how many children have been told things like that and how many have remembered? Anyway, I do want to bring attention to this book because so many times children try to talk to their parents about the visitors that they've had in their room, or whether they've been taken away for a while. They might remember a tiny bit of that, or maybe not. Most kids just remember that a being or 2 or 3 beings just were there in the room or outside when they were playing. So just a couple of days ago, I regressed somebody to an experience where she was outside sitting in the grass. In fact, she said, I was hiding in the grass and a being came and took her away for a little while. And then we got into the details of that. And she was only age 6 at that time. So there are many, many instances where it's come up in regressions and from deliberately doing a regression when somebody knows that they had an experience of that sort when they were a child. And of course, if you've had an experience when you were a child, it's extremely likely, I think almost certain, that you will continue to have experiences during most of the rest of your lifetime. And then when an adult comes to me and knows about an adult experience or two, but remembers nothing about teenagers or children, when they were children having experiences. But I say, well, it's very, very common that if an adult is having an experience, they've also been having them from much earlier in their life, but they just might not remember it. They might not have known about it at the time because the beings so very effectively make us not being aware of most of the experience, or even in many cases, they make us be unaware of the entire experience from the first moment right through to the end. But what I have found, and it is so wonderful, that the subconscious part of our mind, this would be true for all of us, has recorded absolutely everything that we have experienced. And it has recorded even those things that have happened to us that we were not even consciously aware of. So it's all there in the subconscious part of the mind. And if we ask to know about that, as we do in regression, that material just comes forward moment by moment as if we're reliving the experience, no matter what age we were when that experience happened. Notably, even as young as being in your mother's womb.
I certainly believe it. We know so much more about consciousness now, and the power, like how powerful our minds and our consciousness really are. And we still don't know everything about memory. We still don't know everything about the brain. I mean, to me, it makes sense that that would occur as a buried memory, considering how early on it was. But I
Yeah.
have a question to you, Barbara. When people come to you, like the people that have come to you, this is sort of a broad question, so I know you can't answer it exactly. But so many people, thousands, as you said earlier, have come to you for regressions. And so many of them have had early childhood experiences. But how many of them who came to you for regression are currently having, or were currently having, experiences as an adult? And that's what triggered them to come to you, and then discovered that they had early. Oh, most of them. Oh, wow.
So it might be as recent as a week before the person comes for regression, although usually people can't get regressions with me that soon, but a week or a month or 2 months or 6 months, or just recently I had somebody who come, or a few months ago in February, she had an experience that she wanted to know more about. Yeah. And I just cannot help but want to emphasize that it's kind of a big thing for somebody to actually choose to come for a regression
Mm-hmm.
time and
Mm-hmm.
be willing to open up, to be willing to find out. So obviously there's a real curiosity, even more than a curiosity, there's a real deep interest in wanting to know what happened, or in many cases, people come wanting to know if something more happened than what they were consciously aware of.
Mm-hmm.
It happens often with people who are experiencers, as we call people who experience these things. It's very, very common that somebody will be aware of something that gets their attention, that they wonder about for a while. Maybe they wonder about it for years or even decades. And so they might be, it's very typical to be aware of waking up, and sometimes they describe it as just feeling a presence, or feeling like they're being looked at, feeling like they're being watched, feeling like there's somebody there, a presence. Or sometimes they'll wake up and they'll see some light outside the window that shouldn't be there, because maybe the window of their bedroom is on the second or third floor. Well, what's that light? Or they'll see that there's light out there at a distance, or they'll see that there's light coming into the room
Mm.
from a window. It might be a beam of light, or it might be a more diffuse area of light. Or they might be aware that they're being touched. For instance, their arm is being touched, or their hand, if it's on top of the covers, might be touched, or their face might be touched. And it's never an abrasive touch. It's always gentle. If someone has just put their hand on them, or they might not feel that, but they might feel that they're being levitated up in their bed, loaded up, or they might feel they're being floated down through the foot of the bed, or just slid out the side of the bed, or lifted up over the bed. That's very, very typical.
Yeah.
And they feel the blankets just sort of falling away. And then they'll begin to be aware, oh my goodness, there's somebody here. And or sometimes they'll wake up and there's somebody right there. And they realize, ooh, not only is somebody right here, but this somebody isn't even human. I don't know what it is, but it's not human, but it's looking at me. It seems to be conscious and living. And then they get more impressions as time goes on. And then so often they are made to be not consciously aware, again, what we call being switched off. And so they often don't remember too much about that initial contact. And that can be true whether they're outside in the daytime, outside in the nighttime, at home in the living room, in the kitchen, wherever they are, in bed. These encounters can happen anywhere. And they can also happen right when the person is in midst of a group of people. I've had a number of regressions where somebody was taken from a party, or from a school classroom, or a big crowded beach. One woman was taken. And in that situation, she was actually a grown woman, but this could happen easily to a child too, that the child is with his or her own group of people, and then somehow has the thought, which we think is influenced by the beings who are so telepathic, they can send us thoughts. But anyway, the person, the human, has the impulse to get up from that group on the beach, as one lady did, and just take a nice long walk along the beach by herself, away from where other people were. And when she was far down the beach away from other people, that's where the encounter began. But people have taken right out through a crowded indoor situation. I have several examples of that have come in my work. And all the other people with that one are switched off. So whatever they were doing their work, or they were just about to drink something at a party or smoke a cigarette, and beings came, switched them off, took the one they wanted, they were having a series of experiences with, and for an hour or two, and then brought the person back, turned everybody on again, and disappeared.
Okay, so I have to ask you this: when you say they're being switched off, are you saying that time is being frozen, or is it okay? So everything stops, not just the people; everything stops.
Well, our Earth time, our clocks and watches keep.
Okay.
From a person's point of view, they are just frozen in mid-action or mid-sentence or mid-gulp or whatever they were doing. That they just all at the same time. Just like frozen, not harmed in any way, just unaware, not able to move, And as long as 2 hours can easily go on when they're in that state. And then when the beings come back and take off whatever that influence is that made them stop and be unaware, that then there's complete drinking or smoking the cigarette, although that by that time it's burned out.
Yes, that's kind of what I'm wondering about is like, is time frozen, or would it be that if those people who were temporarily, switched off, as you put it, if they were aware, would they know that they had 2 hours of missing time? Right? Like, even though they're not the one that's being taken away, they're the ones that are being left behind while someone else is being taken away. But I'm curious what the experiences of the people who are left behind. Is their reality frozen? And then when the person comes back, it picks up from the second it left off in terms of time? Or would it be so time keeps going and then they miss 2 hours, but they're not aware of having missed 2 hours?
Be aware that something unusual happened until they look at their watch or the clock. This happened to me.
Okay.
And my last experience, where it was bright and sunny in the afternoon, and I was removed from my home and then put back in the same place, which just happened to be my hallway downstairs. And the window opposite me, which what I thought was a moment earlier, it was bright and sunny outside. But after I was returned, when I looked out that window opposite me, it was completely dark outside. I thought, wait a minute, how could it was just bright and sunny a minute ago? I thought it had only been a minute ago, but it's dark now, and it's completely dark. So I looked at my watch and I thought, oh yeah, I had thought it would be around 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon just a minute ago when I came in to use the bathroom. But now it's completely dark and it's 2 hours later. Oh my goodness. I wonder if
Okay. So, and this is when you yourself would have been taken to have the experience, right? You would have been taken. Okay, so what if there's a situation where there's a party and let's say there's 10 people there and one person is being taken away, everyone else, the remaining 9, are still in the room. Do they, while that person is being taken away for an hour or 2 hours, is everyone just frozen in position for that entire time and then they get unfrozen? Okay, so then those 9 people would have to recognize that they had had an episode of missing time.
yes.
But of course, if you're in a party and you're drinking and stuff like that, you wouldn't necessarily know that an hour had gone by or that an hour and a half had gone by. That's kind of interesting.
Really good time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of how the Canadian band, Grant Cameron told me about this. I'm pretty sure it was the Moody Blues, that the whole band was abducted and it was from a concert. And so I've always been curious about, well, what about all the people around them? Like, what did they experience, while the band was gone? What happened to their reality? Anyway.
The whole audience, I didn't know about that incident, but probably the whole audience was just frozen in their seats or standing or wherever they were watching.
Bizarre.
And then click when it all went back again and the members were back and playing their music. Anybody in the audience, if they had looked at their watches, they would have realized that, oh, it was much later than they thought.
Wow.
So that happened quite a number of times that I'm aware of, that the remaining people who are not taken, when somebody amidst them is taken, they're just amazed at how quickly that time went. I've never known time to go so fast, I've heard people say.
Mm-hmm.
How could it be 2 hours later? I thought it was like this happened in a big insurance company in New York City. One of those big rooms where there are lots and lots of cubicles of
Uh-huh.
people
Uh-huh.
not seeing each other, but each in their own cubicle with their own computer and phone and everything. And the elevator doors in the hall opened, and beings came in, turned everybody off with whatever they were doing, wherever they were in their own cubicle, at, let's say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they came and took this one woman from her cubicle. She had the experience. And a couple of hours later, they brought her back, put her at her desk, at her seat by her computer. And she came to, and they made it that everyone else kind of came to. And gradually people were saying to each other, didn't it seem like time went awfully fast today? Where did the last 2 hours go?
Oh my
Or
goodness.
how did it go by so fast?
Is this
You
in one of your books, by the way? This sounds vaguely familiar. Is this in one of your books?
know, it might be, but I don't think so. But
Okay.
it's maybe we've just talked about it before.
Yeah, that's
Or
possible. Sorry to, yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to kind of grab that because that's a great example of how bizarre it can really be. And just for the audience's sake, if they were curious and reading more about that, they could find it in one of your books. Because of course, just so everyone knows, we're going to be posting the link for Barbara's children's book under this video, and also all of her other books, her website, and her site that you go to book a regression with her. That will always be below the videos we're posting here. So that will be there. Yeah. And your book, your children's book really is incredible, Barbara. It's a wonderful book. The illustrations are very engaging. The stories are fascinating. I don't see how kids would not fall in love with that book. It's a wonderful book. Yeah.
it's interesting because the current publisher, as I mentioned, we're having it published a second time by a publisher. And when the publisher sent the proof of the whole book, fortunately, I happened to notice that at the sort of the introduction page, it said, this is a book of fiction. And I immediately notified her and said, no, the whole point of this book is that this is real experiences that real children have had that come out of my work of knowing these children and doing many regressions with them. They were to regress. And that is the whole point of it, to show people that these are to help you educate people in general, whoever would be interested in this. Many won't, but many are. And that this is to validate it, because people still wonder. I have adults that might be as old as 60 or 70 who come in and say, well, I don't know, I'm so confused. I have all these things that I remember bits and pieces of, but I just don't see how it could possibly be true. I don't think there's any such thing as extraterrestrial beings or UFOs. And yet, and then they'll tell me about the experiences that they've remembered a few moments of. So it just doesn't make sense. And so then I say, well, if you want to, we can go back to one of those incidents that you remember a few moments of and see if anything else happened. We don't know at this point. And so I don't automatically assume that anybody who comes to me has had those experiences. Sometimes what they had been aware of might be something else to do with extraterrestrials. So, I also try to, and I encourage them to, just keep an open mind, the assumptions beforehand. But what it has added up to, with 6,000 or so regressions, and more adding all the time, that it certainly seems like there is a lot of this activity going on.
Yes, and I mean, you are only one of hundreds of people who have taken this topic seriously for so long around the world. I mean, the data is absolutely enormous, and it's incredible to me still that it hasn't been allowed to make it to the mainstream level. But with that in mind, in terms of mainstream level and the general public knowing that this is really happening, Your children's book, you mentioned that it's for educational purposes. And I love that you said that, because the time we're living in right now is absolutely extraordinary in terms of this topic. And right now in your country, the US, the government is being pressured by an increasing number of lawmakers, policymakers, political leaders of all kinds, which I'm amazed by. I wasn't sure this was going to happen, but they are
Yeah.
pressuring for the release of facts and information regarding what the US government actually knows about UFOs and ETs. There's been an
Right.
incredibly high level whistleblower, David Grush. The UFO community has been on fire about this since June 5th, when Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal's article was released on the debrief about the 12 UFOs, the UFO that the US probably has. It looks like that anyway, behind the scenes. So this is a very exciting time where realities are starting to collide. What has seemed to be pure fiction and fantasy, according to people who have been given the message that it is through mainstream media, news, and otherwise. Of course, why would they believe that it's real? It seems to be completely ludicrous, but we are getting to know space more and more and more. It is increasingly difficult to believe that we are the only life in the entire universe. That does not seem to make any sense. And then we
Right.
have, the reality of UFOs and ETs coming closer and closer to our daily lives as human beings here on this planet, with things like what's happening in the US. So your book is important because I think we really are, perhaps, both fingers crossed, getting closer to a time of official disclosure. And if that does happen, parents are going to need support for their kids who are going to find out about it and are going to be confused. So your
Yeah.
book will be a wonderful resource in that way. And I just wanted to say that as a kind of not a final note, but an important point to make, because your work has been so important for so long, and I think will become even more important in the future as this information is continued to be validated. It certainly seems like it will be. Here in Canada, we're having there's little tiny quiet bits of news that are coming out in official channels in a very quiet, polite, conservative Canadian way, about what the Canadian government has been doing in partnership with the US governments and others regarding UFOs and ETs. So it does seem like it's really making its way out there, and so thank God that we have resources like your books and your children's book to help people of all ages understand what's going on and understand that it's not what it is like in the movies. It just isn't. It's so much more complex and a lot more positive in many ways.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's been, unfortunately, a lot of scary reports, scary emphasis on this whole thing. And I think that's unfortunate for a number of reasons, especially for those people who experience these things.
Mm-hmm.
All this fear-based emphasis publicly is certainly not helping them to feel okay about it, and also I think that the spreading around of the fear message, fear and threat, that could justify our spending billions more dollars to arm ourselves against these beings.
Yep.
And beings are very favorable, actually, to us. They're different, yes, but they're favorable, and many of them are very, very caring about planet Earth and about us humans.
Mm-hmm. And children are certainly a very important voice in terms of that message. And I think
Yeah.
this is also a great reminder to all of us adults who are listening to you speak right now that, any children in our lives really do need to be heard. They need to have their experiences listened to, whether they're unusual or not. Children need to be valued and empowered, especially if they're going into this world where we have a lot of challenges and we're living in such a pivotal time. So let's all honor children and respect them and listen to them and raise them up and empower them and help them understand that they're cosmic citizens and that there's a lot of wonder and joy and excitement in that reality. Even if it seems to turn everything we know upside down, change is not always a bad thing.
And they are the ones who are going to be in charge after we go.
Yes.
So, very important. I agree.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed.
So let's finish for now. And I love your participation in this and the thoughts and the perspective that you add, Sinead.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I really do. You know, I love having these conversations with you. It really lights my brain up, and I hope it does the same for everyone else. We're getting some wonderful comments and feedback on these interviews and these videos we're putting on YouTube. So for everyone listening, please spread the word, you know, share these videos with friends of yours, family, if you're brave enough, and certainly share with others in the community if you find them useful and informative. And, you know, leave more comments for us. Write to Barbara if you have anything you want to communicate to her. She gets bajillions of emails every day, so please be patient. But you know, reach out and let us know what you think. And thank you, as always, for being here with us and listening to what Barbara has to say. And Barbara, thank you most of all.
You're welcome. Thank you too. Bye.